with another paranormal group very last minute. So we only have 2 of our investigators teaming up with, it looks like 3 or 4 of theirs, to check out an asylum, actually way out in Indiana. The Elizabethtown Paranormal Society has no borders, so we are going to travel far, and we'll go anywhere for a good investigation. And it's, I think, a very good opportunity to network with some like-minded individuals. Rodney and Angela, they might join as the night progresses. The culprit Paranormal in Radcliffe actually secured the location, and we got the place from 6 p.m. to 10 a.m. the next morning. So it's definitely going to be very exciting. We got all the gear, we got all the new gear. The place has a rich, very rich history. It has stuff that we're going to post on our website about the location, so you guys can read about it. A lot of the stuff that we're going to hopefully do, this is completely different from our normal stuff. So normally we go into a house and we're trying to help somebody out. Here we're going to a location that has a very rich history, and we're going to attempt to communicate with something that might be there.
The first building was built in 1851 per the Indiana State Constitution, which said that every county needed to establish a county home for indigent people who were poor, people who were mentally disabled, physically disabled, people who needed help to take care of themselves. This place in 1851 was built on this foundation that we are on today. That original building was made of wood. It was candlelight, oil lamp lights, wood fire stove for heating and cooking, and by 1855 they burned it to the ground. There were 19 residents in here at that point in time. No one was hurt, no one was killed. They built the second building on the other side of the driveway out here. And to get it up as quickly as they possibly could, they fired the bricks on site. Now if you go outside and get a handful of mud, you can make it into a brick shape, throw it in the oven for a couple of days, and when you take it out, it will look like a brick, it will feel like a brick, but it hasn't been heated to a point where it's gotten the glaze on it to protect it from the elements. So the bricks that they were using did not develop a glaze. So basically, as soon as they had that building erected, it started melting in the weather. So we have records from the 1880s showing that the women in the building were taking their bed sheets, taking their pillows, and sticking them in holes in the walls to keep out the wind and to hold the windows in place. Like anything else, and unfortunately it happens today, oh, those poor people, isn't it nice they're being taken care of, we can wash our hands of it now. And they couldn't get the county commissioners to come out and see the state of the building. And in 1895, they had enough of listening to the people complain about the condition of the building, so they decided rather than actually come look at it, they would just do something nice for the people that lived there. So in 1895, they had a brand new invention installed in the basement of that building. 1895, any idea what that might have been that they would have installed?
I mean, it's got to be something.
Freezer, boiler, furnace.
They installed a flushing toilet.
Nice.
In the basement. It's one of the first ones in Randolph County. And they had a contractor come in who did a great job installing it, and it drained from the building all the way back through the woods and back to the creek back there. Now, our historian grew up in Winchester on that creek, and the name of that creek is Salt Creek. He said, when I was growing up, we didn't call it Salt Creek.
Shit Street.
They called it Shit Creek, for obvious reasons. But in 1895, they had that toilet installed with its lovely drain pipe back to the creek. And in 1897, they finally were convinced that they needed to come out and check the condition of the building, because while in the 1890s they could find a contractor who could install the toilet, what they couldn't find in the 1890s was a plumber anywhere close by who knew how to fix a toilet. The main drain line had broken. So by the time the commissioners arrived at the building, you have the walls have holes in them, the windows are falling out, and there are 18 inches of raw sewage in the basement that people are living and cooking above. At that point, they had a decision to make. Do we repair that building or do we build a new one? And they decided ultimately to shore up the foundation of the 1851 asylum and build this building. That foundation from 1851 was extended, and we are in the building that they built. This place opened in December, mid-December of 1899. And everyone, when the building was finished with the completion, they packed up their stuff from across the street, moved across the driveway, and picked a room. Over the course of its time in service, from 1899 to 2006, when it closed, there were 1,487 people who called this place home, be they residents or superintendents and their families. This was a 350-acre working farm. They raised livestock here. They raised popcorn, which actually sold down by the street. They raised vegetables and all those other things. So they were basically self-sustaining. They did get money from the county in taxes to help pay for the things that were not provided by the farm itself, and they paid the salaries for the superintendents. The superintendents were like you and me. They were people who cared and wanted to help, and so it was generally a husband and wife and their children that were the superintendents here. The gentleman generally helped with the farm, and the lady of the house was in charge of housekeeping and making sure that the meals were cooked. Residents that came to the asylum were given the option of working if they wanted to, and picking a job that they would enjoy if they would like to, but it was not required of anyone who lived here. Over the course of its time here, we know of 51 people who passed away whose bodies were not claimed by family members. Those 51 bodies are buried on the grounds in an unmarked graveyard. Because the county was responsible for burying anyone who went unclaimed by family, those bodies would be brought down to either this lobby or the lobby across the way and set, actually where you're sitting, I'm sorry, they would put a table right there and put a coffin, a pine box with the body in it on a table right there, and they would get residents to come down who were mentally capable of doing so and willing to do so, to sit around on that window seat all night long to watch the body to make sure that they didn't wake up. There are diseases that will mimic death, like diabetes. You look like you are dead when you are in fact not. And it was a great fear of people in the Victorian era and following of being buried alive. And that is where we get the term, you can have a funeral or you can have a wake. The wake was held to make sure the body was actually dead. Because the county was responsible, they did not embalm, so you couldn't be sure they really were dead. After the funeral, they would be taken out and buried in the pauper's graveyard, and I will show you the location of that as we continue on our tour. Now, in this part of the building, where we were upstairs and all 4 floors, on this side of the double doors, on any floor, you are in the superintendent section of the building. So this was used by the superintendents. They have a laundry room over there with a storage room behind. And then when you're on the 2 main floors, anywhere with carpeting would belong to the superintendents. The main floor was basically a lobby area for greeting people coming in to become residents or family members wanting to visit residents. This area to the left here has a rather different use. So if you'll go in there, please not do any pole dancing. You will really go down. But as you come in here and you look at the floor, you can see where there is a trough that has been filled in with concrete leading to the drain. That's because everyone on that side is in a small cell that has since been removed, but they did have a cell in there, and there are obviously no bathroom facilities in there. That was placed there in case they had anyone brought in who was a violent mental patient. As I said, it's a mom and pop operation. They're like you and me. They're not trained psychiatrists, and they're not equipped to be able to handle anyone that comes in and is violent. So any violent mental patients that were dropped off here were put in this cell for the safety of the other residents and themselves. And they would call the state police to come pick them up. We don't have any records showing any more than a 2 to 3 hour wait before the state police could come and get them. And once they were picked up, they would be taken to either Richmond or to Muncie, about half-hour drive in either direction, south or west of here, where they had mental institutions where they would be able to take care of them. Now, if you go through here, if they had two that arrived at the same time, they couldn't put them in together. So the solution was over here. If you look right here, you can see the end of a bolt embedded in the wall. Yeah. Because number 2 would be manacled here until the state police could get to it. In 1936, a lady named Ida Gunkel was admitted to the asylum. Her son couldn't take care of her anymore and brought her here. Her husband had died about 6 years before of syphilis. So you have a pretty good idea of what was wrong with Ida. She was originally given a room on the first floor in the women's side, but in 1938 she had slipped so much mentally that she would come running out of her room screaming and pulling at her clothes. They were afraid she was going to get hurt. This is a 350-acre working farm. The drop-off over there, all the farm equipment, the creek at the back, the highway over there. It's a dangerous place. So every evening at 10 o'clock, they would come down here and they would lock Ida in this room. They had brought all her belongings down here, so this was her room, and at 5 o'clock in the morning for wake up, they would come down, open the door, and let her out. They could keep an eye on her during the day, so it wasn't a big deal. And then at night, they'd lock her in. One night, she asked Mrs. Thornburg, who was the matron at the time, for a broom. It's a basement. She brought her a broom, told her goodnight, locked the door, and went to bed. When they came down the next morning at 5 o'clock to open the door for Ida, they found that in the night she had taken the broom, put it over the pipes. Why she didn't just use the pipes, we don't know, so please don't ask me that question, I have no clue. But she had put the broom over the pipes, ripped some of the ticking off of her bed, wrapped it around the broom, around her throat, stepped off her bed, and hanged herself. When they found Ida, her feet were on the ground and she was leaning forward at a 45-degree angle. Her death certificate did not help in determining the cause of death for Ida. She died of suffocation. Okay, that's helpful. But when she fell, did she suffocate hanging and then the ticking stretched overnight and that left her with her feet on the ground leaning forward? Or did she misjudge the length and then leaned into it? Yeah. We don't. So as you go through the asylum, you'll find 2 rooms on each floor that have a slanted wall. Those rooms are, if you look at the building from above, the building is shaped like a cross, which goes back to the Indiana Constitution where it says places like this were intended to do the work of Christ. So you'll find a lot of asylums that are cross-shaped from above. Right. But this slanted wall is where that cross beam comes through. Okay? Any room with a slanted wall was never used for a residence. They were used for other purposes. Most of them have something to do with medical. In this case, it's a workshop. So they would let the men come down here and they could, put 2,000 screws in the workbench. They could put enough nails in there to make sure that it would never, ever come off. And do projects down here. Now, do you have SLS cameras?
Sure do.
Yeah.
This is a good room to do it in.
Oh.
So, any ideas what that in the corner is? This is actually the laundry chute. And this is obviously not the laundry room.
Right.
Oh, like would they just pull a string and then would go up to the laundry room or something, or?
Oh, keep in mind where that is, and I'll show you where the laundry room is, and then we'll figure out why that is, where it is. A little further on in the tour. Anthony. Anthony. I told you that people that came here that wanted to work could, and in 1906, an African-American gentleman named Anthony came into the asylum as a resident, and he decided he wanted to work, and he decided the job he wanted was to make sure that the furnace and the water heater were kept stocked with coal. So he actually had his bunk down here, and he slept down here. Now, at no point in its history was this asylum segregated by race, ever. It was segregated by gender, but never by race. So he could have lived upstairs, and we had African-American residents upstairs. This was simply the job that he chose, and this was the most convenient location for him to do it from.
Davis.
I just want to see if you've done it.
Nice. Last time. Right?
That is exactly what that is. So this is the men's side of the building, the south side of the building. This is the men's side of the building, and this is the men's dining room. 3 times a day, everybody came down here for meals, and that bell rang 5 times a day. Wake up, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and lights out. In the 1990s, this was turned into more of a nursing home than a county farm, poor farm kind of thing. Most of the residents here were seniors, so they tried to do away with the bell. And after 2 weeks of the residents moping around and crying about not having the bell, they brought the bell back. Now this room is where the creeper crawler elemental lives. So you'll see the little black knee-high octopus looking thing. This is what it looks like in the photos I've seen of it. But it runs the floor, it runs the walls across the ceiling, and it's in this room, the women's dining room, and the kitchen area.
I don't know why, this is cool.
Thank you. So that is a photo of Doris Addington. When Doris was 2 or 3 years old, she was kicked in the head by a mule. And it did something to her speech. She's still really, really smart. She just had a really hard time enunciating what it was she was trying to say. So when she was 11 years old and her parents died in an accident, her 2 older sisters thought that Doris would be a detriment to them being adopted together. So they brought Doris to the asylum, left her on the front steps, and went to the orphanage themselves. So from the time she was 11 years old until she was 84, Doris lived here. Doris chose to cook, and apparently she was an amazing cook. So for 72 years, she was involved in making every meal that went through this place. She was also very involved in the community. So some of the flowers you see are actually from community members because she helped with church bake sales and things like that. So she was a very loved member of the community and very loved here at the asylum. So she was here for over 70 years, and she did pass away here. Paranormal Lockdown was here. Doris will talk to you, by the way. She's really sweet. Paranormal Lockdown was here, and they were sleeping here in the kitchen, hoping to get Doris's attention, and were woken up in the middle of the night by this sound. So there is something else in here, and I don't think it's Doris. This is an old refrigerator. If you look inside it, it looks like a spa or a sauna, but not a refrigerator. Very cool thing. People do sit in there hoping to catch something. This is another one of those wonky doors. It will open from the inside. I can't make it do it because you have to push this really, really hard. So again, I'll be here at 11. So.
Like you remember at the old place, like the Gold Show? I had one right here. I noted it down.
So we are on the women's side, second floor, and I keep talking about women's floor, men's floor, blah, 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 men's side, women's side. This room explains why. All the other walls in here are stone.
Right.
This is cheap plywood. In the 1915, they removed this wall and put these two rooms together. In 1914, a young lady named Lulu Woods was admitted to the asylum with her stepfather. At that point in time, the asylum was not segregated by gender. They kept families together regardless of gender. So Lulu and her stepfather were in the same room. Lulu was 14 years old and became pregnant. Dad went to jail. Lulu gave birth to the first of 3 illegitimate children she had here. The birth of that first child and being attacked and raped by her stepfather did something to Lulu and made her very vulnerable to men and a victim of men the rest of her life. The 3 children that she had were raised here in a nursery setting in these 2 rooms until they finally were able to complete the paperwork to say that she was not mentally capable of taking care of the children. And the children were removed and sent to the orphanage here in Randolph County. All 3 children were adopted by the same family in Muncie, Indiana, so the children stayed together. Because of what happened to Lulu, this asylum from that point on was segregated by gender and strictly adhered to, except during World War II. And again, we have rumors of rapes, thefts, and murders being committed here on the 2nd floor by hooligans who were not eligible for the draft in World War II. Now during World War II, they were taking in one-eyed, flat-footed soldiers. I've heard that term. It took quite a bit to not be eligible for the draft. So most of the people that ended up in here that weren't eligible for the draft were drunks. They were drunks, and they weren't stupid. And they took every advantage that they could. So you will hear the women on this floor being slightly angry.
Oh, so there's a lot of activity.
There's a lot of activity in there. And this room, Lulu is very active in this room. And you see the balloons and the flowers.
Yeah.
That's because Lulu has mentioned that she likes balloons and flowers, and she doesn't like anyone thinking that she's a slut. When Lulu passed away, she was in and out of the asylum her entire life, and when Lulu passed away, she passed away here. Her death certificate records that she had heavy vaginal bleeding and bruising at the time of her death, at the age of 64. Shadow figure,
that's what I'm
this
saying.
real tall shadow figure, if you've watched anything about here, that tends to work around these 2 doors.
These 2 doors here?
These 2 doors here. So World War II. Prior to World War II, there was a gentleman whose name was Judge William, who admitted himself to the asylum when he retired. He didn't have any family, and he said, I'll pay my own way to live there. Because he said, if I go live at the asylum, I will have a roof over my head, 3 meals a day, and all the company I could want. So he admitted himself to the asylum in the mid-1930s, and he lived here until he passed away. Judge William saw what was going on in Europe and thought that it wouldn't be long before the United States was also involved in the war, and he was concerned about drunks, jerks, being admitted to the asylum if the United States went to war. So he went to the superintendent, whose name was Mr. Studi at the time, and Mr. Studi and the judge went to the sheriff here in Randolph County to come up with a solution for any troublemakers that might be admitted to the asylum. And we'll head down here and you can see the solution that they came up with. This is medical room. On this floor has been converted.
What? That is a whole cage.
Now there is space to walk all the way around, and in this room you can see that they've actually moved the toilet from that small restroom area into the cell. This cell was used. They did hold court sessions here at the asylum up in the attic, and people were sentenced to time to spend in that cell. We have heard stories of rapes. We have heard stories of theft.
Yeah.
And we also have stories of men on this floor who were not in league with the troublemakers, not coming down for breakfast and being found in bed with a pillow over their face. In World War II, this room belonged to a gentleman named John Oliver Champ in 1943. He was 82 years old, and he didn't much care for the shenanigans going on, and he's right down the hall from the superintendent, so anytime he heard anything going on, he'd go tell Studi. They didn't much care for being told on. And so one Saturday, they were having a cleaning day, and they were all cleaning their windows, and Mr. Champ cleaned the inside of his window. And to clean the outside of the window, he is 82 years old. He is not going to climb a ladder and clean a window. So his solution was open the window, sit on the sill, turn around, shut the window over my lap, and clean the outside up as high as I can, right? That makes sense to me. Which was fine until two men came in, opened the window, and dropped him off the side. Again, can't prove it. Police never investigated it. They say on his death certificate he died of an accidental fall. But we do have the superintendent, Mr. Studi's diary, and he was coming back from the barn at the time, and he was walking across, and he said, I saw Champ fall, and I saw two men walking away from the window.
It's John
Oliver Champ.
Oliver Champ.
So the reason I bring you in here, this is the superintendent's section of the attic, and they use this for storage, but the ceiling. I know it's dumb. This is the original ceiling. It is red oak. This is what was put up in 1899, and if you look to the top of the post to the right of the little light up there, you can see how this entire ceiling is held together.
Wooden nails?
Pegs. It is held together with pegs. The entire ceiling.
Don't let me go up there. Jesus, not to try and
Like
make
when he's in
jokes.
super.
Wow. Because all the craftsmanship that
Yes.
is unmatched.
So, question,
Yes, sir.
Santana active?
No.
Okay, we have equipment that will
No,
set.
no, no. That is not active. It
Okay.
hasn't been active since. They put those in 2004, and then they put a metal roof on the building. So the court was held up here. The judge has been seen in this area up here, usually over here around this post. So that's SLS cameras again come in handy up here. And then there have been children on the main floor of the attic picked up with the SLS. So they did hold court in this area.